If a deranged know-it-all trapped you inside a homemade dungeon so he could force his ideology down your throat, what would you do? Our heroes might be in the business of converting others, but apparently they never expected one of their prospects to pull an Uno reverse, at least not like this. However, while on the surface it might seem like this guy only wants to teach them a lesson, at the end of the day, he's really just a well-read psychopath, and the only conversion he aims to conduct is turning them into corpses. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the unholy man in Heretic. Sisters Barnes and Paxton are on a mission. No, not that kind of mission. The boring kind. Although, their adventure has certainly seen its fair share of setbacks.
Do you wear magic underwear?
Yep, there's nothing quite like getting brutally humiliated out in front of God and everyone to let you know exactly what people think of you. Guess they got their work cut out for them. However, despite the warm welcome they received from the local youth, it turns out there's at least one person around here who's willing to give Joseph Smith a chance. This brings our protagonist to the home of one Mr. Reed. According to their hit list, this guy specifically asked for a couple missionaries to come by and teach him more about the church. So how much trouble could he possibly be, right? Upon answering the door, the man appears friendly, if not a bit odd. And while there's nothing about his behavior that would earn him a face full of hot sauce, I can't help but feel like he's just a little off. I mean, for one thing, the dude seems distracted, or maybe a little nervous, to the point that he even mixes up the girls' names despite them both obviously wearing name tags. It's not a major red flag for sure, but there's clearly something else on his mind right now, and I'd rather not find out the hard way that it involves chloroform. Whatever the case, it seems Sister Barnes agrees, as she's quick to invoke their supposed rule about not entering a home without another woman present. Apparently, it's for safety. Although, if that's really the case, then I've gotta wonder why they wouldn't wait around for visual confirmation before casually walking inside. What, you don't think some creepazoid would be willing to lie about having a wife just to get you in the door? And sure, there's been plenty of cases where women were complicit in horrendous acts of violence against other women. But if you're gonna make that a rule, then you might as well follow it properly. Otherwise, you're just telling potential scumbags something that they can use to lure you into a trap. Oh, what's that? You want to meet my wife? Yeah, she's just on the other side of this heavy steel door. But yeah, I guess we're just gonna take this guy at his word and question absolutely nothing. You know, like when he randomly tells us that all the walls and ceiling have metal in them. That's a totally normal thing to bring up when someone enters your home. Seriously though, how about we stop and think about the implications of this for a second? Could it mean that we won't be able to get any cell service in here? Maybe, but either way, that's something we should probably figure out now so we're not pointlessly screwing with our phones when something goes horribly wrong. Also, let's not ignore how strange it is that he would mention this totally unprompted. Like, I guess if you know your house is old enough to still have metal in the walls, it would be nice to inform your guests that they might get poor reception. But even then, he totally left that part out. Call me paranoid, 'cause I definitely am. But the way I see it, dude was dropping a subtle hint that they've just become totally cut off from the outside world. Taken by itself, it might not seem like that big a deal. But when you look over at the front door and realize there's no visible unlocking mechanism, it becomes clear that this guy's got them exactly where he wants them. Unfortunately, it seems our heroes are far too preoccupied with the prospects of racking up another baptism to notice all this. But I've got a feeling that's all gonna change here in just a couple minutes. For now, Mr. Reed sits them down with a couple cokes that they thankfully do not drink, and begins their discussion by busting out his own heavily annotated copy of the Book of Mormon. Yeah, kinda weird that someone who's already so thoroughly dissected the religion would be requesting a couple late-teen ground pounders to pay him a visit, don't you think? Now, according to the LDS website, a missionary can perform a baptism on someone who's ready to convert, but that doesn't seem to be what this is all about. Instead, the dude just goes on to ask them a mix of personal and religious questions that really only serve as fodder for debate rather than a means of satisfying his curiosity. I won't bore you with all the details as the discussion itself is fairly inconsequential, but it's worth noting the way that Reed keeps abruptly changing the subject. He'll either ask some lighthearted and innocuous question about pie, before immediately dropping something heavy, like, "How did your father die?" Or he'll wait for the girls to get visibly uncomfortable, only to ask them what their favorite fast food is. Sure, there's nothing inherently wrong with changing the subject if you feel like you've hit a nerve, but there's just something about the way that he does it that seems predatory, almost like he's gauging how much he can get away with, and then reeling them back in with this whole "I'm just a kooky old man" routine. It's weird, okay? Just see for yourself.
Question, what's your favorite fast food?
For real though, dude clearly sensed that they were looking for the door and decided to claw them back in with that ridiculous segue into the rest of his spiel. The only good news is that it seems the girls have finally seen through Mr. Reed's charm and are starting to think about an exit strategy. However, when it really sinks in is the moment that Sister Barnes inspects the nearby candle to find that the delicious aroma of fresh-baked blueberry pie that they've been drooling over is nothing more than a store-bought facade. You see, all this time Mr. Reed's wife has supposedly been busy slaving over a delicious pie for them to enjoy. Not sure how that could be a reasonable excuse when it was supposed to be in the oven already, but maybe in this universe desserts are painstakingly beaten to temperature with a ball-peen hammer. Who knows? Anyway, with the fictional Mrs. Reed having apparently finished all her pretend baking, the missionaries are informed that she's finally ready to meet them somewhere deeper inside the house. Cause, you know, that doesn't sound like a trap at all. Perhaps sensing this, the girls politely excuse themselves to take a fake phone call, which Mr. Reed obviously knows is bullshit because all the metal in the walls. All the same, the homeowner agrees to give them their space and goes on to wait for them in the other room. So yeah, that was nice of him. In fact, maybe this whole thing is just one big misunderstanding. After all, if he were really intent on harming these two, why would he leave them both unsupervised right next to the front door? Well, that's probably because it doesn't open. Oh, and look at that. The windows are all too small for them to climb out through. And just to top it all off, the metal in the walls is preventing them from making an emergency phone call. Awesome. Still, our heroes aren't entirely screwed just yet. I mean, it's really not looking good, but there's still a chance that they could get a text out by holding their phones directly against a window. Problem is, glass, especially thicker double-paned glass, can all disrupt cell phone signals. So if that doesn't work, we'll just have to grab one of the table lamps lying around and bash the window out. All 4 emergency service centers in Boulder County, Colorado are equipped to process texts just as well as calls. So as long as we can break free of the dead zone, we should be able to get help on the way. Of course, the moment we start breaking stuff in this guy's living room, he'll almost certainly come running. As a matter of fact, he's probably watching us on some kind of surveillance system at this very moment. Knowing this, we'll want to have our distress text fully typed out to include both the address and a description of the situation before we even pick up a weapon. Then, while one of us holds the phone out to confirm the message has been sent, the other will face the hallway with a floor lamp in hand to prepare for Reed's response. Lucky for us, the only entrance to the room is extremely narrow, meaning it'll be much easier for us to keep him at a distance using improvised weapons, especially if we work together. Naturally, it'd be even easier if at least one of these ladies thought to bring pepper spray along. But for some reason, it seems that isn't the case. I mean, come on. You're walking up to all these random strangers, knocking on all these random doors, going in and out of all these random houses. John Moses Browning was a Mormon, and he sure as hell didn't expect God to do all the work. And believe me when I tell you that there is plenty of work to be done. It could take the cops as long as half an hour to show up at this place, maybe even longer. Meanwhile, these 2 petite women are going to be locked inside a house with a potential serial killer who's going to be extra pissed off that they just compromised his entire op. and broke his window. Now, with that all being said, maybe you're not yet convinced that this level of action is warranted given everything we've seen so far. Maybe Reed's wife really is just shy and needed some time to prepare for company. Maybe it was a total coincidence that the candle happened to be blueberry pie scented, just like the pie that she was supposedly baking. And maybe the front door utilizes some kind of obscure old-timey locking system we simply don't recognize. None of that makes it any less alarming that this guy wants Barnes and Paxton to move farther away from the only known exit to join his wife for pie, especially when she could easily spare 30 seconds to come out and reassure them herself. I mean, come on. Is she inside an iron lung or something? Dude knows the girls are extremely uncomfortable right now. He knows that they have a rule requiring another woman to be present while they're inside someone's home. The absolute least that he could do is ask his wife to pop her head into the living room before they have a panic attack. And yet, this whole time, he's done nothing but push their boundaries further and further with each passing second. Oh yeah, come inside and meet my wife. Oh yeah, I understand she needs to be here, but let me just change the subject real quick so you forget. Oh yeah, I know you're both totally freaked out right now, but just follow me down this pitch dark hallway so I can show you that there's nothing to worry about. Get the hell out of here. However, despite realizing pretty much all of this, our protagonists somehow arrive at the conclusion that they should follow Mr. Reed into the obvious trap, so they can ask him to open the front door. You know, never mind the fact that like 10 seconds ago they were ready to abandon their coats and their bikes and then walk 4 miles back to the stake center through pouring rain just to avoid seeing him again. For real though, if you're that concerned this guy might be a sicko, why on earth would you ever expect him to let you out of his house? We all know that that's not happening, but hey, they can't just stand around this one little room and wait for divine intervention, right? Wrong. Well, sort of. Remember, Mr. Reed's address was assigned to them as a follow-up call, so there has to be at least one other church member at the local level who knows the missionaries went out there. Couple this with the fact that they never returned to complete their regularly scheduled chores, and there's plenty of reason for them to believe that someone will eventually come looking for them. Now, it wouldn't be my first choice, but if we weren't willing to start ripping and tearing until it's done, waiting for help to arrive would probably be the next best thing. Problem is, it's far more likely Mr. Reed will come back before that happens. But either way, it beats wandering into an ambush. And besides, if by some miracle it turns out that this guy's willing to let us go, what difference does it make whether we went to go ask him? So yeah, there you have it. There is absolutely nothing to be gained by walking into the dark, spooky hallway. But alas, it seems our protagonists must have left their thinking caps at the door, as that is exactly what they do. And sure enough,
The deadbolts are on a timer. It won't open again till morning.
wow, that's bullshit. See, now I know this dude's just playing with his food here, because there is no way in hell anyone in their right mind would ever believe something like that. Okay, you're telling me you willingly relinquished all control over your front door to a clock, even if that's true, which it isn't. But even if it is, the mere fact that he'd be stupid enough to create such an extreme and obvious fire hazard is all the more reason we need to GTFO. I mean, what's next? Does he keep a diesel generator running in his house for white noise? But no, of course the girls know it's a lie. And worse yet, he wants them to know it's a lie, because now they know that he's in control. So where does that leave us? Some kind of DIY in-home altar? Can't wait to see what happens here. However, surprisingly, it turns out Mr. Reed isn't actually planning to cut their hearts out and eat them. At least not yet. No, on the contrary, he assures them that they're free to leave at any time. All they have to do is decide which of the two doors behind him to exit through, and they can finally put this nightmare to bed. That's what he says anyway. Dude's already a proven liar, so in all likelihood, both of these doors lead somewhere horrible. Fortunately, it seems both Barnes and Paxton have already seen enough to suspect as much. But where they ultimately go wrong is in their assumption that they can still talk their way out of this mess. Just think about it. He lied about the pie. He lied about his wife. He lied about the front door, and he's almost certainly lying about the back door. Knowing all this, the only reasonable conclusion that you can draw is that he intends to keep you here against your will, if not worse. So how about we stop pretending like anything we say matters at this point, and start working out a plan to ice this weirdo? I mean, sure, we've got the numbers advantage, but there's no telling what this guy's capable of, or whether he might be armed. So rushing in empty-handed probably is not the best idea right now. Plus, just take a look around. Between the bronze candlesticks, the plethora of heavy-looking sculptures, and that conveniently placed letter opener, there's more than enough violent trash scattered around this place for us to show him the light. It's just a matter of getting our hands on it without arousing suspicion. Lucky for us, Mr. Reed really likes to hear himself talk, and he's not above turning his back on the audience when he's trying to make a point. Knowing this, we can use his many lapses in attentiveness to coordinate silently, through a combination of quick glances and furtive gestures, all while slowly repositioning ourselves until we both have a viable weapon within arm's reach. Then, once he's either lost in his own brilliance or fixated on a single one of us, we'll make like a coconut and cave his skull in. As a matter of fact, there's a great opportunity for the sisters to do this when Reed allows them both to inspect the doors. Here, we can see him turning his back as they're each beside a candlestick. Granted, he doesn't stay that way for very long, but it was still more than enough time for them to arm themselves and start closing in. And besides, even if he briefly sees it coming, there's not a lot that he'd be able to do without a weapon of his own. Now, alternatively, we could try running away when we're by the hallway, as Sister Paxton covertly suggests, but we already know that there's no getting past the front door. So really, all that would accomplish is changing the location of our epic final showdown. Sure, this might allow us to ambush the when he comes in after us, but the thing is, once we take off, you can bet Mr. Reed will drop the nice guy routine for something a bit more Anton Chigurh. And since he has home court advantage, it's entirely possible he might break out the silenced 1187 along with it. So yeah, neither option is perfect by any means, but I'd much rather take my chances while we can still potentially catch him off guard. All we have to do is keep him talking and wait for him to unwittingly set himself up. Easier said than done, for sure, but at least we know the first part won't take too much effort. And sure enough, it's not long before the host with the most locks his guests into yet another spirited debate. Just like before, the details aren't all that important, but in substance, his argument is that there can be no God in a universe where the board game Monopoly exists. Unfortunately, instead of our heroes using the dialogue to keep Reed distracted, the opposite occurs. Come to think of it, it's starting to seem like all the religious talk is really just a means to obscure the fact that this guy's nothing but an articulate kidnapper. I mean, it's not like Paxton and Barnes would willingly stroll through door number 1 unless they actually thought that it was the way out. And the only reason that they even believed that in the first place is because they supposedly won the argument and beat him at his own game. Spoiler alert, they did not. Oh, would you look at that? Both doors led down to an empty pit of death. Who could have seen that coming? But hey, on the positive side, Barnes managed to squirrel away the letter opener before taking the bait, so at least they have that. Down here, where it's essentially useless. Jokes aside, this is, by all accounts, very bad. Not only is escape farther away than ever, being down in a dungeon behind the house means there's pretty much zero chance an investigating church member will hear them screaming for help. That said, the change in scenery does provide a few unique vulnerabilities that we might be able to exploit. Looking at the construction, it appears that the top portion of the structure is primarily made out of wood. Now, it's unclear whether Reed might have covered the exterior in sheet metal to suppress outgoing cell signals, but either way, it'd be worth checking our phones again to see if there's any changes. And yeah, I realize it's unlikely the man would send us into an unshielded area while we both still have our cell phones, but at the same time, he's also a pompous ass who thinks he's got it all figured out. could it be that he's just assuming the big reveal about our phones not working will deter us from even trying? Well, there's only one way to find out. Obviously, the earth and stoneworks surrounding the lower portion will still block most, if not all, reception. But if we can climb up onto this ledge, using the crotch and the nearby support beam, the wood alone shouldn't be enough to stop us from getting a text out. However, if for whatever reason that still doesn't work, we do have one last option. Notice the metal grate covering this small rectangular window. If it's thin enough, we might be able to pry it loose using the letter opener. Once that's out of the way, we can hold our phone out through the opening and hit send. Or even throw the damn thing. We do have two after all. As a matter of fact, ditching one of the phones in this manner could still make all the difference, even if we don't get a signal. You see, once the missing persons reports go out, investigators will undoubtedly contact our cell providers to pull up our location histories. And naturally, it wouldn't look too good for Mr. Reed if it turned out that our last known position was right outside his front door. Knowing this, I gotta believe he's planning to take our phones for a little ride and dump them down in a river somewhere along with the bicycles. But what if he can't find them? Even eliminating one of the devices in this manner would still have the same result. Although, given he'd probably notice the missing grate, it might be better to simply smash one into 1,000 pieces while keeping the other one just in case. As for whether the cops would actually be able to use this information before we're worm chow, well, that all depends on Mr. Reed's long-term plans. Best case scenario, he realizes the jig is up when he can't find one of our phones, and immediately skips town without finishing the job. Worst case scenario, we don't even survive the night. Also, I'm fully aware that he might do us both in out of anger for destroying one of our phones, but if there's no other way to signal for help, then what does it even matter? Dude's probably planning to take us out regardless. And besides, it's not like we don't have at least some say in the matter. Between the letter opener and our newly acquired nail board, we could still potentially turn the tables. All we have to do is camp out beside each of the two entrances and pray to Mormatron himself that the dude is dumb enough to come down and check on us. And wouldn't you know it, our protagonists suddenly hear what sounds like someone approaching, followed by the creaking of one of the doors as it slowly swings open. Naturally, given this might be their only chance to escape, both girls quickly assume ambush positions on either side of the entrance and begin mentally preparing themselves for the fight of their lives. Nah, I'm just kidding. They actually just stand there mouths agape, like a couple stupid turkeys drowning in the rain. Lucky for them, the noise just turns out to be some ghoulish, otherworldly finger maiden here to bring them that blueberry pie they wanted. It's about god time, right? Well, apparently not. As we come to find out, this little horror show is merely another prop in the whole production. You see, according to Mr. Reed, the pie is laced with enough deadly nightshade and wolfsbane to drop this freak on the spot, which is apparently the whole idea. However, he then goes on to explain that after a few minutes of being dead as hell, the hag will spontaneously reanimate, thereby proving her to be some kind of prophet in what he describes as the one true religion. Now, is this true? I sincerely doubt it. Man's done nothing but lie to us since we got here, so why would this time be any different? Moreover, I still maintain that he's only using the subject of religion as a red herring to throw them off of his true intentions. You know, make them think that he only brought them here to bear witness, when in reality, he's setting them up for some real ready or not type. After all, if you let them know the truth, they might become desperate. And we all know desperation equals danger. But as long as you keep nourishing that faint glimmer of hope in the back of their minds that this whole ordeal isn't what it looks like, they'll be less inclined to fight back or do something permanent. So yeah, maybe old what's-her-name is an accomplice. Maybe she's another prisoner. Or maybe the pie itself is a paid actor. All I know is that whatever this guy wants us to think is happening is only meant to distract us from what's really going on. However, by that same token, if we play along and act like he's got us fooled, it might cause him to let his guard down a bit, and that could be all we need to get the better of him. Plus, it's not like we've got much of a choice right now. God knows the moment you find yourself trapped in some nutjob's artisanal torture chamber, things probably aren't gonna get any better. Which is all the more reason we should have done literally everything within our power to avoid coming down here in the first place. Anyway, the pie lady goes limp, at which time Mr. Reed instructs the girls to check for a pulse. Finding no sign of life, they agree with their captor's assertion that she is, in fact, deceased. But before the so-called prophet can peel her face off the table and relate her visions from the other side, a sudden alarm bell heralds the arrival of one Elder Kennedy from the local ward. Evidently, the man noticed his missionary's absence at some point and has since been checking in with every household on their hit list to try and track him down. And while I certainly applaud the elder's observance and dedication to his people, I can't help but notice a distinct lack of extremely simple procedures that would have narrowed his search down immediately. Okay, you're telling me that in the age of ubiquitous cell phone usage, there's no policy in place to track house calls using SMS? Obviously, you can't expect the missionaries to check in every time they knock on a door, but you could at least have them shoot off a quick text containing an address whenever they're preparing to enter someone's home. Then once they leave, have them send another one saying as much. Problem solved. Instead, Mr. Kennedy was forced to spend over an hour knocking and talking until he eventually found the right house. Because there's no evidence to suggest Paxton and Barnes had ever been there in the first place, all it takes is a brief bit of awkward stammering for Mr. Reed to throw him off completely. So that's just great. Also, if you're concerned enough about someone's disappearance that you're willing to walk across town in a snowstorm to look for them, you really ought to get the police involved. I mean, the mere fact that a couple people their age would allow both their phones to go offline is concerning enough on its own. Factor in the severe weather conditions, and they could easily be face down in a ditch somewhere. So there's plenty of reason for him to believe that this is an emergency. Of course, given the cops would still be working from the same limited information as Elder Kennedy, it's not likely calling it in would make a huge difference in this case. But there's still a chance, however small, that they might pick up on Reed's suspicious behavior and put two and two together. Now, whether they'd be able to claim exigent circumstances from that alone is another matter entirely, but at the very least, a long talk with the police would buy the girls more time to act on their own end. Speaking of which, their first reaction upon hearing someone's at the door is to scream for help. But unfortunately, the house's construction and layout prevents their cries from reaching the elder. Realizing this, they shift their focus to a box of matches that fell in front of the door. It seems their plan is to retrieve the matches and then light them in front of the speaking pipe to signal Kennedy via the smoke. But, like, how? First of all, do you honestly think the man is gonna notice the smell of smoke on a cold winter's day where tons of other people are likely running wood stoves? There's no way. And besides, you can bet that pipe is going to be really long and really cold, which means the smoke will almost certainly start to cool down and sink well before it ever makes it outside. Oh yeah, it also doesn't help that old Blueberry Face woke up just in time to screw everything up. Gee, thanks lady. And right on cue, here comes Mr. Reed to put his little pet prophet back in her box. However, in doing so, he puts himself in a near perfect position to get stabbed through the neck. Nothing in his hands, head down at their level, face turned slightly away. Dude's basically serving himself up on a silver platter right now, so I gotta wonder, why has no one made him regret it? Well, if I had to guess, it probably has something to do with the fact that Sister Barnes gave up the letter opener. This is because, and I quote, "he's watching me too closely." And while that's probably true, it's only because Sister Paxton has barely been keeping it together since they first entered the chapel. So yes, maybe he wouldn't see an attack coming if it came from her instead. But when she's crying her eyes out, begging you not to give her the weapon, do you honestly think that she'll be able to perform when push comes to shove? Clearly, she will not. And sure, I get that Barnes didn't give her the pre-established go phrase that signals her to strike. But at that point, anyone with eyes should have easily been able to see that this was likely the best chance that they were going to get to turn things around. No, were I in Barnes's position, I would have kept the letter opener and left Paxton in charge of creating a diversion. Granted, this would still be a lot to ask of someone in her current mental state, but it's nowhere near the pressure of expecting her to kill someone. As for how that she would go about it, I'd instruct her to hang around the hidden nail board whenever Reed is in the room. Then, once the time is right, we'll signal her to pick it up and start threatening him, at which point he'll ideally be distracted enough for us to close in and make a really big mess. Is it a perfect plan? No, definitely not. But at least it keeps our only concealable weapon in the hands of someone who's willing to use it effectively, as opposed to someone who can't even look at it. Case in point, here's Mr. Reed crouching right back down at their level again, not 1 minute later. Keep in mind, the letter opener is hidden inside Sister P's right pocket right now, meaning she could easily get it ready without him noticing. And yet, nothing. Oh, and how about here, where he's standing right in front of them with a pen and paper in his hands? Seems like a pretty good opportunity to me. But no, of course, she's not gonna take it because she's probably scared out of her mind. The fact is, if Paxton is gonna strike, it's gonna have to be made as easy for her as possible. And that means getting Reed to turn his back to her. Now, credit where it's due. It appears that Barnes is aware of this. And so to that end, she locks their captor in one last argument, all the while shifting his attention away from her partner. And you know what that means.
We're talking about magic underwear.
Guess they should have used a shorter code word. Seriously though, it's too bad the roles weren't reversed, or else Mr. Reed would be Mr. Red right now. But alas, this is where we're at. And now that Paxton's totally lost her nerve, it seems more than likely that this is where the sidewalk ends. That being said, there is one silver lining that our hero could potentially exploit, provided she can pull herself together. This being the box cutter, or rather, the fact that Mr. Reed doesn't appear to be armed with anything else. You see, a weapon like that is only good for slashing, and while he could easily cut us to the bone if we're not careful, the only way that he'll be able to take us out quickly is by running it across our neck like he did with Sister Barnes. Knowing this, I would ball up my jacket and hold it in my left hand as a sort of shield to protect my throat and potentially catch the blade. Meanwhile, we can use the superior reach of our stabbing weapon to keep him at a distance with repeated strikes until we can eventually find an opening. Now, it's not a slam dunk by any means, as the dude is still considerably larger and stronger than we are. But considering there's nowhere to run, and he's gone straight up psycho mode, I don't really see how we have another option. However, strangely enough, it turns out the big bad isn't looking to wrap things up just yet, as upon leaving the stairwell, Sister Paxton finds him calmly waiting to resume his usual shtick. This time around, it's about simulation theory, but at this point, he might as well be selling timeshares. What's important is that his only weapon is currently back inside his shirt pocket where it's effectively useless, and since Paxton was able to properly stow the letter opener before Reed could spot it, we're looking at the perfect opportunity for our hero to get a little payback. I mean, she's not going to, for some reason, but she totally could. After all, there's no possible way that the man could get that thing out and deploy it fast enough to stop her, especially when he's sitting down right next to her, mindlessly scribbling onto the table. But no, instead of bringing a swift end to this nightmare while she still has the chance, Paxton decides the best way to honor her fallen friend is by picking up where she left off and engaging in pointless argument. As a matter of fact, it's starting to feel like we've been here before. There's even a mysterious hatch leading down to a previously unknown lower level that she somehow believes will be better than this one. Really though, there's nothing about this whole scenario that seems familiar to you. You know, like how you've supposedly outsmarted this maniac and beat him at his own game, and now you're going to go triumphantly walking off into the sunset. Does that ring any bells at all? Nah, what am I saying? I'm sure this guy's totally gonna let you go after you watched him commit cold-blooded murder. He seems like the honest type. And sure enough, the new path takes her somewhere infinitely worse. Although, at least this time she has a lot more company. Then again, it doesn't seem like there'll be much help the way that they're all caged up and severely malnourished, so we should probably just move on. Fact is, even if she could get them out of their pens somehow, there's no way that they'll be able to move fast enough to escape Mr. Reed, who is almost certainly waiting for us at the other end of the tunnel. So if we really want to help them, the best way to do that is by ensuring our own survival. Otherwise, there won't be anyone left to send back help. Unfortunately, it doesn't make much of a difference either way, as it turns out our captor was already right around the corner. It is here that we learn Mr. Reed believes all religions are about control, and apparently, the only way that he saw fit to explain this to others is by committing multiple long-term kidnappings and brutal homicides. Nah, the truth is this guy doesn't really care about convincing anyone of anything. He just likes watching people squirm, especially from up close. That'll shut him up. For now, anyway. You see, the problem is this dude's head is still noticeably attached to the rest of his body. For real though, this is not a stab and run type of situation, as if one ever existed. You have no idea how far this tunnel goes or where it lets out, and that's assuming he didn't lock the door behind him on his way down. Furthermore, by leaving the blade inside the wound, you not only limit the potential blood loss and tissue damage, you also surrender your one and only means of protecting yourself. And that's really gonna bite you in the ass if it turns out that this thing only leads back to the pit of despair, which it does. However, it's worth pointing out that there's a small room between the tunnel exit and the pit where it seems Mr. Reed was conducting the latter half of his experiment. Now, we know that he has a key that he can use to enter it from the stairwell, but with all the furniture lying around, we should be able to properly barricade both sides and turn it into a panic room. And yes, I realize the door to the stairwell opens outward, but the entryway is small enough that we could easily jam a bookcase or two in there and effectively seal it off. Also, keep in mind that Mr. Reed has been seriously injured and will very likely die without urgent medical attention. In that case, our best option is to simply sit tight and let him bleed for a bit in the hopes that he'll eventually keel over. And besides, what exactly is the alternative? We already know that we can't escape through the dungeon, so even if he's already dead, we'll still probably wind up stuck in here until the police pull up our phone's location history. Whatever the case, there is absolutely no reason, none whatsoever, why we should go back down into the pit. It does not benefit us in any way, and it only increases the likelihood of getting attacked. But of course, you already know our hero is gonna go down there. And just like that, Sister Paxton suddenly finds herself staring down at the letter opener as Mr. Reed thrusts it into her abdomen. And since she didn't even bother grabbing the fire poker before leaving the previous room, all she can do is pray as she waits for the coup de grace. Now, I'm not much of a praying man myself. I have no tongue for it. But if I were to ask God for anything in this situation, it'd probably look a lot like this. Huh. Looks like Paxton was the diversion after all. And with that, Sister Barnes dies for real this time, after which her fellow missionary finds a secret hatch allowing her to finally make her escape. In the end, only one of our heroes managed to survive, and even then, just barely. Had Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton played to their strengths as we had suggested, I'm confident both of them would have made it out alive. For that reason, I think Heretic was beaten. Moral of the story, you can't argue your way out of someone's basement.